Okay, we're recording. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, we have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Philip Thomas Tucker. He's the author of 75 books. He's a very prolific writer on primarily American history, is what I could see from his very long list of history books. But today we're going to talk about one of those books that he's written. The title of that book is America's Female Buffalo Soldier, a new look at the life of Cathy Williams in history and memory. It was published in 2017. But Mr. Tucker is an award-winning historian dedicated to compiling corrected and informed works on the truth of the American experience. And like I said, he's written many books. He's also internationally renowned for his presentation of historical narratives in a manner that brings to light lesser-known events that have defined our understanding of history as we study it. And some of his titles, I'm going to list not all of them, but one is George Washington's Surprise Attack, a new look at the battle that decided the fate of America, published 2014. Also, How the Irish Won the American Revolution, a new look at the forgotten heroes of America's War of Independence, 2015. Anne Bonny, the infamous female pirate, 2017. Gettysburg's Most Hellish Battleground, The Devil's Den, July 2nd to 1863, from 2019. Also, Exodus from the Alamo, The Anatomy of the Last Stand Myth, 2020. And Pickett's Charge, revised and updated, a new look at Gettysburg's Final Attack, 2020. And you can find all those that I just listed at Amazon or through his website, which is his full name, philipthomastucker.com. Again, his website is philipthomastucker.com. But Dr. Tucker, are you there?
Yes, sir. Thank
Awesome.
you for the great introduction, and I appreciate your kind words, and ready to talk about Cathy Williams.
Great. I mean, this is a name that I hadn't heard. I was familiar with the Buffalo Soldiers, but for people who may not have heard of some of your books, your background, can you talk? You have a very lengthy CV. Can you talk about your background and what led you to write this book, America's Female Buffalo Soldier?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I appreciate that. I try throughout my career to specialize on people who have never received recognition that certainly deserve recognition, and Cathy Williams fit into that perfectly. She disguised herself as a male, and right after the Civil War, she joined the Buffalo Soldiers. Most people think Buffalo Soldiers were cavalrymen, but actually several regiments were infantry regiments. She joined the 38th United States Infantry, which was an all-black Buffalo Soldier regiment. Her situation was unique, and because right after the Civil War, and after being freed, she had to devise a means how to support herself and survive, and she came up with the novel concept of serving as a male soldier. She enlisted. She was a Missourian. She enlisted at Jefferson Barracks, which is just south of St. Louis on the Mississippi River, and it's an installation to this day. And on November 15th, 1866, not long after Congress gave the formal approval for the creation of Buffalo Soldier Regiment, she joined on that day, November 15th, 1866.
And
she was a Missourian. She was born in Jackson County, Missouri, and that's on the other side of the state from St. Louis, near Kansas City. She was born near Independence, Missouri, which is in Jackson County, Missouri, the start of the famous Santa Fe Trail. She was born a slave, of course, and in her own words, she gave a great interview to a St. Louis newspaperman that appeared in January 2nd, 1876 edition of the St. Louis Daily Times. Quote unquote, here's what she told the reporter. My father was a free man, but my mother a slave, belonging to William Johnson, a wealthy farmer, lived at the time I was born near Independence, Jackson County, Missouri. So we don't know much about her background other than she was a slave. And we do know she served throughout the years in the Civil War, but not in terms of her own free will. When Missouri was liberated by Union troops in the summer of 1861, Union troops marched into, she was at Jefferson City at this time, which is the capital of Missouri, and she was liberated at that time in June 1861, and she was forced to accompany Union soldiers as a cook. She made a career out of it from 1861 to 1865, serving not only in the Western Theater but also in the Eastern Theater, including in the cooking for the staff of General Phil Sheridan when he conducted his famous Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1864.
And she was kind of part of a tradition of African American slaves or freedmen being cooks for kind of generals or the military, or even kind of known revolutionary people like Jefferson and Washington,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that goes way back, like you mentioned, to the American Revolution. Washington had a number of black female slaves who were cooks at his headquarters, and this tradition goes way back to the French and Indian War, and it was very commonplace. Of course, the turning point in American history where African Americans served, of course, was in the Civil War, when Lincoln, with his decision to emancipate the slaves, of course, he also authorized the black regiments. They were called United States Colored Troops. Officially, that was the official name. And they made a very distinguished contribution because the Civil War, 4-year war, was a war of attrition, and manpower was the key. And the South had no extra available manpower, so the North really benefited from utilizing over 200,000 African American troops of these USCT regiments, and they played key roles in the last 2 years of the war, 1864 and 1865. Now, what's kind of interesting about Cathy Williams, as a cook in the Civil War, she really wasn't connected with these regiments. She was connected with white units and white commanders like Phil Sheridan. And however, the influence and the role that she heard about from the USCT troops certainly inspired her. We don't know in her own words, she didn't say this, but they almost certainly, she saw them, and it certainly inspired her to enlist in the Buffalo Soldiers, November 15th, 1866, in part because those regiments at that time, the Buffalo Soldier regiments, consisted primarily of Civil War veterans, black veterans who served in the USCT units that played such key roles in combat situations in 1864 and 1865. It's kind of interesting, the story you mentioned, the title of the book that came out in 2017. Actually, the first book about Cathy Williams, I had, it was released in 2002. And that's entitled Cathy Williams from Slave to Female Buffalo Soldier. Actually, I've done 3 books on her. The second one is America's Female Buffalo Soldier, a new look at the life of Cathy Williams' history and memory. And that I included new material that I found, research that I didn't have for the 2002 book. And I also came out with a third book on Cathy Williams. This was in 2019, entitled Cathy Williams, American Female Buffalo Soldier. In her own words, where I give a good background of her, and also we printed up her words that she told her life story to this St. Louis newspaperman of the St. Louis Daily Times. It's very revealing, and this was the basis of the book, of course, is her own story, plus I had documents from the National Archives about her enlistment.
And often, like, these types of characters were overlooked in history as, kind of the socioeconomically disadvantaged were often not focused on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's why I did it. It's certainly a forgotten story, and it kind of ends tragically because even the government denied her existence, basically, on the legal premise that women legally could not serve in the U.S. military. Therefore, she wasn't deserving of a military pension after she, in the late 1800s, when she was really in bad shape physically and really needed attention. So she didn't get much respect from anybody, but she was very proud of her service. She served from, like I say, November 1866 to October 1868, and quote unquote, here's what she says: I was never put in the guardhouse. No bayonet was ever put to my back. I carried my musket and did guard and other duties while in the Army. So she was very, had a soldier mentality, very proud of what she accomplished, which included an Apache campaign in the mountains of New Mexico that she served on. And like you say, she's one of the forgotten people in American history and African American history.
Even so, and
but actually, she's the first black female soldier who served in the U.S. military. So in that sense, of course, she's a pioneer for all the black women who today serve in the U.S. military.
Right, and she had an unblemished record until she was discovered as a woman. So she had an unblemished.
Yeah, correct, indeed. She allowed herself, after successfully, disguised as a male for almost 2 years. She was tall and thin, and so that helped her in her disguise, of course. And she finally allowed herself to be discovered because she got tired of military service. At that time, there was some real problems on her outpost duty at remote forts in New Mexico. There was some racial issues. The white officers, the black troops of the Civil War had white officers, and they also had white officers, the Buffalo Soldier regiments. At that time, she was pretty discouraged because there was some ugly racial incidents between the Buffalo Soldiers and the white officers. Some of the white officers were Southerners and may well have served in the Confederate Army in that case. But it's, like you say, it's a story that has just fallen through the cracks, and that's one reason why I really wanted to do whatever I could about it, because I knew it was a great story and it was time for it to be told. Like I said, the first book, Cathy Williams from Slave and Female Buffalo Soldier, came out in 2002, and that was a time where black history was a lot less accepted than it is now. I was actually very lucky to get it published. Stackpole Books in Pennsylvania was the publisher, and fortunately I had a very good relationship with them. They're a Civil War publisher, one of the best, and I had done 3 other books with them. They were Civil War, and I had a good relationship with the editor, Mr. William C. Davis. He's one of the biggest names in history and in American history. And I knew it would be a tough sell because they were a Civil War publisher. Usually when you publish a book, you just toss your idea to the editor, and hopefully, they'll accept it. But I knew this would be tough. So I decided to gamble, which because I knew the story was so important, it had to be published. So I did something that was unprecedented. You're not supposed to do. I just wrote the book and sent it to the publisher, which is pretty crazy. But I just didn't want to take a chance that for anybody to say no. And luckily, they liked it, and so the book came out in 2002. And we have a great cover portrait of Cathy Williams. We don't know what Cathy Williams looked like, of course. There's no known photographs of her. That doesn't mean none exist. Maybe one day one will be discovered. But on the cover of the book, we have a great painting by a Kansas City artist named William Jennings. And he has her in full uniform. And in the 90s, it was a very popular painting. You often saw it at art stores. And that was the height of Cathy Williams' interest in her, was during that period. And it was the first painting that came out representing her, so I was lucky to get that on the cover.
Right, and you can see that she kind of cultivated a manly appearance, right? Like you wrote that in the book, that she definitely had her hair either short or something like that.
Yeah. Now, William Jennings, of course, he's a great painter, and he's using a little artistic license because we don't really know what she looks like other than her enlistment papers, in which described her as rather tall and thin and dark. He used a high school model, I believe, and she's obviously very pretty, and it would have been hard to fool the men if she actually looked like that. So it's kind of a glamorized portrait, but it's still a good one, and it catches her essence and spirit. Now, when I was a historian for the United States Air Force with the Department of Defense, we had a good artist on ex-military man on the base, and I asked him, well, can you do me a sketch of Cathy Williams and kind of make it more realistic to what she probably actually looked like? And so he did a great portrait of her. The artist's name is Marty Brazil, and he was living in Biloxi, Mississippi. I was a historian at Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi. He did a great pen and ink sketch of her where you just can't tell the difference if it's a he or she, which, that's certainly more authentic than the cover painting by Mr. Jennings, even though he did a marvelous job. But we have this sketch. I was able to get it in the Cathy Williams book that came out in 2002, and that really added a lot and nicely complements the cover portrait.
Right. And she was definitely a pioneer as well as a Buffalo Soldier. There were other pioneers headed west that were also African American women too, right? And men.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really like about the book and writing about African American history in general. It's a gold mine, not so much monetarily, but in terms of the richness of the history. And there's a very strong tradition of African Americans going west, and it goes all the way back to the colonial period, even before the French and Indian War. They're on the frontier, black men and women, in the north and the south. For example, some of the earliest defenders of South Carolina when they against Native American attacks in the militia, you had African Americans serving in the militia. And this was pretty universal all throughout the colonies, all the way from New York down to South Carolina and then Georgia. So there's a very long and distinguished tradition that Cathy Williams is a part of, but she does earn the renown of having been the first black female to have served officially in the United States military. There might have been others, maybe they'll surface one day, but at this time we don't know of any others, and so Cathy Williams has that position all by herself. So like I say, it's a great story, and it was one that needed to be told. And I was just lucky enough to kind of stumble upon it, in part because I was from Missouri, and her story is very much of a Missouri story. Again, she was born in Jackson County, Missouri, near Kansas City, 1844, and she enlisted in just south of St. Louis, Jefferson Barracks, which I grew up in the St. Louis area, so this is very personal. She enlisted on November 15th, which happens to be my birthday, strange enough. So I knew all about these places where she lived as a slave, and also after she was liberated. So also knew about the battlefields and the areas where she served in the Civil War, and also about the places where she served out west. So the story
right, there was
really,
that. Well, sorry to interrupt.
really
It was
came together.
The Battle of Pea Ridge, right? Wasn't she there?
Yeah, she was there as a cook, and that was a key battle, because really that was like the Gettysburg of the Trans-Mississippi Theater. Basically, after Pea Ridge, the North was ensured the conquest of the Trans-Mississippi Theater, or west of the Mississippi River, which was far more strategically important than generations of the historians have basically recognized. I'd like to tell you also how her legacy lives on. In 2002, I was a historian of the D.C. area and had a talk about Cathy Williams at a Barnes & Noble in Alexandria, Virginia. And it just so happened the manager of the bookstore, the story of Cathy Williams rang a bell with him. He remembered, he was an African-American gentleman. His name was Bernard C. Drews, Jr. And I had him he said he knew of Cathy Williams. He had heard about her, not by name, but he knew from an incident that happened during the Second World War. I had him write a letter about the experience, and he said, and this was in 2002, when I met him December 2nd for the presentation of Cathy Williams, he wrote, some 38 years ago in 1964, I was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas. And this is where Cathy Williams once served when she, after she enlisted in St. Louis, she went out and was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas. To continue Mr. Drew's account, I was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas as a second lieutenant in the 2nd Brigade of the U.S. Army 1st Division, the Big Red One. I recall very distinctly having to break up a barracks fight between two young enlisted soldiers. One of them had stated that he had been very convincingly informed by some African-American residents in the town of Junction City, Kansas, just outside Fort Riley, that there had been a female soldier in the Buffalo Soldiers. The other soldier, who apparently viewed himself as a Buffalo Soldier historian, took great offense at the statement, and a fight ensued.
Wow.
So here we have in the Second World War the verification of Cathy Williams, her legacy, that I was able to find by just giving a talk about her in December 2002.
Wow, that's really interesting. And for people who may not have known of the background of the Buffalo Soldiers, can you talk about them in that period in history of what was happening in the Midwest?
Yes, of course. What the United States government learned, of course, by the Civil War, is it might not well have been won without the over 200,000 black troops, the USCT regiments, served mainly in 1864 and 1865. Therefore, after the Civil War, and of course 1865, the next challenge for the U.S. Army was to pacify the western frontier. The railroads were pushing west, and settlers were moving west, and they needed to be protected, of course. And that's when Congress authorized these Buffalo Soldier regiments. Again, like I mentioned, not only cavalry but also infantry regiments. And like I said, Cathy Williams had joined the 38th United States Infantry, which was a Buffalo Soldier regiment. So they played throughout the history of the West, from the 1860s to even the 1890s. In that period, they were African-American troops of the Buffalo Soldier regiments played key roles throughout the West. Of course, the troopers of the black troopers of the 9th and 10th Cavalry are the most famous, but the infantry personnel like Cathy Williams, 38th U.S. Infantry, also played a key role. But it's not only a Western frontier story, but it's also about the Spanish-American War. Buffalo Soldiers played key roles in the Spanish-American War. For example, they were among the first troops that captured the Spanish defenses at San Juan Hill. Of course, Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, who were all white soldiers, of course, a lot of blue bloods from New York City, like Roosevelt, they received all the credit for having taken San Juan Hill, and of course that was the catalyst that pushed Roosevelt into the White House. But actually, when the white Rough Riders reached the crest of San Juan Hill, the Buffalo Soldiers were there waiting for them. They had led the way, and that's just one example, but they played prominent roles not only in the Spanish-American War, but later in the Philippine insurrection, a war that lasted quite a few years, on into the early years of the 20th century, and they're playing leading roles for the United States military. They were almost like shock troops. They were, if any tough work had to be done, they had the Buffalo Soldiers first and foremost, and they compiled a very distinguished record.
And at that time, disease was like a serious problem too, right?
Yeah. That like during the Civil War or any war from the American Revolution to Civil War, disease always took more lives than enemy bullets. And that was no exception. The Buffalo Soldiers went through the same situation. Matter of fact, Cathy Williams, her health was virtually destroyed by her 2 years of service, which was very physically demanding, even including one time swimming the Rio Grande River up near its upper reaches in New Mexico. And by the 1880s, her health was very seriously impaired, and that was one reason why she needed the disability pension. And she actually got a lawyer and hoped that she was able to get this pension. And they worked with government officials in Washington, D.C. And, of course, like I mentioned, she failed to get her pension on the premise that legally females could serve in the United States Army. Therefore, she wasn't entitled to any benefits, even though she served nearly 2 years. Another interesting aspect of her life, and you brought it up, it's not just a military story, but it's a very, very much of a pioneering story, and this is good reason to take a look at her life, because I focus on other black pioneers who were out west. And she mentioned, for example, after she left the Union Army, again, this was as a cook and a laundress. She served from 1861 to 1865. Quote unquote, here's her own words: after leaving the Army, I went to Pueblo, Colorado, where I made money by cooking in Washington. I got married while there, but my husband was no account. He stole my watch and chain, $100 in money, and my team of horses and wagon. I had him arrested and put in jail. Then I came here, which was Trinidad, Colorado. That's where she finally settled, and that's where she ended her life. What little information we have about this period. She goes on about Trinidad, Colorado. I like this town. I know all the good people here, and I expect to get rich yet. I have not got my land won. I thought I would wait till the railroad came and then take my land near the depot. Ulysses S. Grant owns all this land around here, and it won't cost me anything. When she said Grant, she means the U.S. government. I shall never live in the States again. At that time, of course, Colorado was a territory yet to be a state. And here she continues, I shall never live in the States again. You see, I have a good sewing machine, and I get washing to do and clothes to make. I want to get along and not be a burden to my friends and relatives. Now, that's a key statement, because that was her exact reasoning, as she stated also in this interview, about why she joined the Buffalo Soldiers, November 5th, 1866. Quote unquote, not to be a burden to my friends or relatives. So she was, as a woman, she was certainly ahead of her time in terms of being independent and single-minded and wanting to go her own way. So it's a real American story in terms of about courage and character and doing what you believe in, and her life personifies all that, even her enlistment as a Buffalo Soldier.
Right, and
Trinidad as a pioneer.
Right, and Trinidad is what, just a little bit north, currently, of the border of New Mexico, right? So it's south of Colorado.
13 miles north, and it's in mountainous country. It's a very picturesque location, and she finally found the peace out west that certainly didn't exist in her native state of Missouri, of course, where she knew slavery and also the horrors of Civil War. So out west, she found a certain peace of mind. It was more multicultural out there, of course, with more Hispanics and Native Americans, much different than her native Missouri. So she found her place that she had always been looking for. We don't know much about the end of her life, because she just falls off the historical record after she refused her disability pension again, because it was illegal for women to serve in the U.S. military. Therefore, they used that angle to decline her pension, even though she was physically bad shape. So we don't know where exactly she ends, but we do think it looks like she spent the rest of her days in this Trinidad, Colorado.
Right.
It's kind of interesting. Her life came full circle in a very strange way. Her service in the Buffalo Soldiers revolved very much around duty along the Santa Fe Trail. And that was an old wagon route that way before the Mexican-American War that Missouri traders would go west, south, and west and go to the Spanish territory. And Santa Fe was the capital, and that's where they would do a lot of trading. And the start of the Santa Fe Trail was Independence, Missouri, near where she was born. And Colorado was actually located on the Santa Fe Trail. So it's really kind of odd that her whole life from beginning to end centers on the Santa Fe Trail.
That is interesting.
The exception being the Civil War, where she served in armies both in the Western Theater and the Eastern Theater. And that for nearly 4 years from 1861 to 1865.
And she kind of had to come out of slavery, gets emancipated, liberated, and then sees kind of that same type of enslavement of Native Americans kind of in the area she's at, right? New Mexico.
Yeah. She saw the, both the ugly sides and the better sides that, she was more readily accepted out west because actually it was more, generally speaking, more of a egalitarian atmosphere in the West in terms of people from all over the place that were settling, and people had to really get along more than, say, the East in order to survive. So there was more of neighbors helping each other and everybody kind of working together because times were, could get pretty tough. And so she found it greatly to her liking, and she found peace in where she wanted to be at this little town, Trinidad, Colorado. Some reviewers of the book have understood, the different aspects I presented and appreciated it. For example, the Library Journal, they said about the Cathy Williams book, and this is the first one in 2002, Cathy Williams, Slave to Female Buffalo Soldier. They say, quote unquote, the Library Journal, a unique story of gender and race, time and place. Tucker's work is recommended read. It reaches across categories from Americans, African Americans, and military history to Western and women's history. And that really captured the essence of it, and that's why I knew the story was important, and that's why it was fun to do, because you're dealing with so many different subjects and so many different fields, but yet you're only, writing the story of the life of one person, which was a real treat because it gave you an opportunity to look in other directions and tell other stories. So that was very, very enjoyable.
And I think you can tell in reading your book, like you can tell you have a very broad knowledge of American history because you're putting all this information about Custer and his relationship to some African American cooks, things that enrich her story. And it's interesting because she and Custer kind of went west together. She had to have known Custer, right? Or about Custer?
Yeah, at some point, because it's interesting you bring up Custer. Custer was offered after the Civil War. He was offered to command a Buffalo Soldier regiment. Of course, he declined for obvious reasons, I think. But yeah, I think I was fortunate to do the book because I had been writing about American history for so long at that point that you were able to go different directions and in different fields and trying to place her story in perspective as much as possible. In telling her story, you have to tell the story of others, in part because there's really so little documentation about her life. Again, like I mentioned, we just have two things. We have her National Archives service records in Washington, D.C. They're pretty scanty, but they give you the basic facts. And then the rather short interview that she gave the St. Louis newspaperman that appeared in January 2nd, 1876 issue of a major St. Louis newspaper. And at that time, there was something. The reporter was interested in doing her story because that was the centennial, and patriotism was very, very high. So, yeah, to tell her story, you have to fill in the gaps. And luckily, I had a broad knowledge of Missouri history, African American history, Civil War history, women's history. So it really came together really nicely and very easily, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great read. I learned a lot from this. I'd never heard her name before. Dr. Tucker, where is the best place for people to get America's Female Buffalo Soldier?
Yeah, all three volumes that I've done on her. Again, the first one being in 2002, and then the second one was 2017, and the third one was 2019. Just on Amazon. I'm on Amazon under Philip Thomas Tucker, and you can see her books, and they've been well received. And, I've been pretty lucky, and it's very fun to do. I don't know if the rest of my life I'll ever find a story quite as good as the story of Cathy.
Interesting. And if people want to reach out to you, the best place is your website, Philip Thomas Tucker, all one word. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
PhilipThomasTucker.com, right? Or do you have any other social media you want to promote?
No, actually, I keep a low profile on social media. I just kind of keep my head down and do my work. But I'm on the internet. You can see me on there.
Just type in Dr. Philip Thomas Tucker. Again, thank you so much for the interview. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I greatly appreciate it. It's an honor, and
great.
You did a great job, and we got a great subject, so we got something good going.
All right, stay there just for 1 second. Let me just finish this title. America's Female Buffalo Soldier, a new look at the life and Cathy Williams in history and memory by Dr. Philip Thomas Tucker, published 2017. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Right,
I appreciate it, and Cathy Williams appreciates you.
Cool. Yeah, we'll keep her memory alive.
Okay, thank you, sir.